So this is a bit of a turn up for the books in a situation that I don't think Microsoft could have predicted. The Xbox Series S is now real. It has been announced. And we're going to be talking about it. And specifically joining me to discuss it, John Linneman.
Hey Rich, how's it going? And yeah, there's a good reason why we're talking about this today, or us together, because this is an interesting one.
Yeah, but before we talk about that, we're going to be having a third guest join us. And here it is right here, the actual Xbox Series S in the hand. Well, you probably saw from the back there that it's actually just a sort of plastic shell, a facsimile of what the... So yeah, let's not big this up too much. We aren't hands-on with actual hardware yet. But you can see that it is a really beautiful little machine. Almost like, you know, the way consoles used to be in many ways. And I think that's one of its principal charms. But I think, first of all, John, we've got to confess something, right? Do you want to fill everyone in?
Yeah, so we've known about this since the March visit, as you might have guessed. You know, they showed it to us back then, but we obviously couldn't talk about it until it was ready to be revealed. And in fact, we recorded a video all the way back in March, before things went crazy, sort of discussing our thoughts on it at the time.
Yeah, so we thought it'd be really interesting to show you edited highlights of that video and then circle back to the present day and then sort of talk about the new revelations that have come about and give our kind of overall opinion on the Xbox Series S. So let's roll the old video. Hey everyone, welcome to a new Digital Foundry Direct. This time we're going to be talking about the Xbox Series S, which is the kind of companion product to the Series X. It's designed with a much lower price point. It's got some strategic nips and tucks to the core specification, and it's got a rather interesting form factor.
And we're still here.
Yeah, so this is going to be a kind of interesting one because in early March, which is now for us in the here and now, we came to Redmond, to Microsoft, to visit the mothership, to check out Series X. And there was a little bonus at the end of day one where we got to see, I guess we were the first people possibly outside of Microsoft to see Xbox Series S, which is a much smaller, more compact console.
Which was interesting because they actually brought it out specifically. They just walked into the room with this bag and kind of like looked around and just like reached in and pulled it out. I think dramatic.
What was quite kind of ominous though was that the sort of curtains were being drawn and dividers were being pulled.
The garage door came down. Yeah. Everybody gathered in around the room and closed the door. And I was like, wait, what's going on?
And then we got to see the Series S literally pulled out of a handbag. And then this made me laugh because every single kind of reveal for a handheld is always an exec walking on stage and bringing out the handheld from the pocket and opening it up. But this time it was the handbag for the Series S. And I got to admit, the form factor, it's absolutely tiny, and I kind of like it. Yeah. So what do you make of that?
So it's an all digital machine, but it's focused on, you know, sort of it's a more affordable box is the idea. How can they get some of the next gen features and do a smaller box that's more affordable? And it is kind of a much, you know, they've done a good job with like minimizing, you know, the size it requires. And you have this really concise little box that sort of takes the design language from Xbox One S, you know, the matte white finish with sort of the black highlights. In this case, they sort of have the fan area, which was sort of a black plastic contrasted against the white. So it's a really nice looking box, and yeah, the size does make it look really appealing, especially sort of in the vertical orientation.
Yeah.
So, you know, but I was more surprised just by like kind of what's in there in terms of hardware.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of in line with what you had guessed, but a little bit more full featured, I think.
Yeah, so this is the curious thing about the internals of the Series S. Well, you know, if this was kind of like a standard console generation, you would kind of look to the Xbox One X and think to yourself, well, this is still a pretty capable machine. What if it wasn't pumping out 4K resolution? What if it was doing 1080p, 1440p as well? The GPU power is probably there to sustain it. So in theory, they could have done a die shrink and maybe repackaged it as the new entry-level console. But what they're finding now is that it's really difficult to actually produce a die shrink of these existing technologies. And it's far simpler simply to take their new design, which was explicitly created for 7 nanometer for the chip fabrication process, and simply downsize a core component of it, and then just create an entry-level SKU that has all of the key features of the Xbox Series X, that simply strategically shaves certain key parts of the spec. And I think we need to talk about that spec, because I don't know, until we actually see the games, it's going to be...
So, I mean, I guess the core is they still have the Zen 2 CPU core. Mm-hmm. They still have the NVMe-based storage. So you still have all the fast storage, which is key because those are really going to be important for next generation games, I think. Whereas, like, you know, if it had been the Jaguar core still from the Xbox One X, aside from the issues with sort of cost reducing and shrinking it, it's just not performant for going forward. So you still get that. The CPU itself is clocked just 200 megahertz lower, I believe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there is that, but then it also has the ray tracing hardware,
right,
and all the support for the same modern set of graphical features. But they've sort of scaled the GPU and the memory bandwidth back to sort of target lower resolutions.
Yeah. So did ask about that. 20 compute units, and I'm guessing that'd be clocked around 1.55 gigahertz, if my maths is correct. It is a 4 teraflop GPU, and memory bandwidth. Here's the funny thing. Now, in the leaks that we saw prior to actually talking to Microsoft about the machine, they were talking about the leaks. We're talking about 12 gigabytes of GDDR6. It's not. It's actually 10 gigabytes, and we've got this curious memory interface setup where effectively you do get a 128-bit solution there for 224 gigabytes per second of bandwidth, which is what I did test in my kind of baseline 4 teraflop Navi video that I did back in the day. I guess from my perspective, I am concerned that 8 gigs isn't going to be enough.
Well, I mean, they're going to have to continue the sort of smart delivery approach where you have the assets for the higher end box, but then there's going to be these lower resolution assets for this box, presumably. So, I mean, they've already done that this generation, so I can see it just being a continuation of the same thing. And if they're targeting lower resolutions, maybe you don't need high resolution textures. So I mean, I see where the thinking is, but there, one of the limitations beyond the graphics though is, the storage is so important, and this box only has 500 gigs versus 1 terabyte, and it's all digital.
Yeah.
So it does still have the slot though, so you can expand it. Which is important.
Very important.
An all digital machine with just 500 gigabytes, I could see that becoming an issue.
Yeah, I suspect there's going to be a lot of expandable storage drives shifting. Hopefully they're going to get enough of them made. But yeah, that is a concern for me in the age where games are moving beyond 100 gigabytes in size in the current generation.
Right.
And what's going to happen in the next generation? That's kind of curious. And again, they were talking about. I mean, they explicitly said that the GPU power will be equivalent to, for standard rasterization and current workloads, it should be broadly equivalent to Xbox One X, and that's kind of what my experiments with 5500 XT demonstrated, that we are at least in the ballpark there. And in terms of how games are going to scale, this is an interesting one because it is focused primarily on producing experiences in the 1080p to 1440p range, whereas they expect 4K to be more of a standard for the Xbox Series X. I guess we don't know right now what the pricing is going to be.
No, I mean, at this point we don't know anything about the pricing.
We don't know, no.
I mean, the move suggests that the Series X is going to be priced rather high, especially when you consider what's in the box. It's definitely an expensive machine.
Yeah, I mean, well, we did actually have a chat with Phil Spencer about it. He was saying we should expect a delta of hundreds of dollars
between the two.
Between Xbox One
Series X
This is going to drive me.
This is going to be a problem for a while.
I'm already making mistakes. Okay, Xbox Series S and the X, they're going to have like a delta of hundreds of dollars. How many hundreds? We don't know. We don't know. But yeah, the point is that they're kind of acknowledging that the cost of producing a generational leap in console technology is actually a real problem, to the point where the original ethos of having a cheaper, gamer-friendly machine is maybe becoming out of reach. We're not going to be getting the same kind of cost reductions over the generation.
That's right.
That we've previously enjoyed. So this they see as a necessary step. And I guess if it's not the machine for you, you have to save up and get a different console. Yeah. Yep. But yeah, also, as you pointed out earlier, another key thing is the total emission of an optical drive, which they said was actually is kind of key to producing this form factor.
Yeah, I mean, it's too small to have fit an optical drive clearly. So, I mean, that was, I guess, I can see from their perspective why that made sense.
Something else they were talking about is that this is a really power efficient box. So, in terms of cost to run, in terms of electricity and whatnot, it's going to be much, much lower than the Series X. So that's an interesting angle too. So yeah, any further thoughts on Series S?
Well, I mean, considering we know a decent amount about it, but there's still a lot more that we don't know since, we focused on X primarily. So yeah, hopefully by the time that this video goes live, we'll have learned even more.
So John, returning to the present day, in that particular video, we had no idea of the pricing. We knew that there would be hundreds of dollars in difference between Xbox Series S and the X, but we didn't really know anything about the strategy, the positioning. Game Pass, I don't think it was mentioned much at all in our technical presentations. So what's your take on all of this?
So yeah, you're right. Now we actually know the price of both the S and the X. And back in March, they had said, we wanted to get this at least couple $100 kind of difference between the two units. But there was a lot of concern, I think, with everyone about the price of what the Series X and by that extension, the PS5 would cost. And it turns out that they were able to get Series X for $499 or $449, I guess, in the UK. But then, so Series S then is just $299, which is, it's funny you mentioned the form factor looking more like an old style console. That's also true of the price. This is the same price that Xbox launched at, the same price that PlayStation 2 launched at. In that sense, it's actually very surprising to see this again at this price point. And they're very open about this being it's a less powerful machine, but it still has a lot of the new features that are inherent to the Series X. It's just more of a machine. They say 1440p, and that might be right, but to me this seems like a 1080p machine versus a 4K machine, where they're just targeting very different resolution. And so this is like, here's a way to get into next gen for cheap, but the caveat, at least especially for me, is it's an all digital machine, and that's where all the services come into play with Game Pass and everything. And I could see this working as sort of a, even for like say a PS5 customer that's like, oh, I'm in the Sony ecosystem, but they're curious about some Xbox stuff. This could be an interesting and affordable way to sort of jump into that as well. Especially with the Game Pass stuff, there's less of a commitment there.
So yeah, my take on this is that they're talking to the audience in a completely different way than we typically understand for the launch period of a console, where it's all about traditionally talking to the core gamer, appealing to them with amazing new first-party exclusives, experiences we've never seen before. Strategy from Microsoft here seems fascinating in that it is so different. It seems to be aiming first and foremost at the mainstream gamer. It's about giving them incredible value via Game Pass. Game Pass has just had EA Access, or rather EA Play, added to it. So, you're going to be getting, in theory, all of the Microsoft first-party titles, such as they are in the launch period. You're going to be getting the EA titles. You're going to be getting all of that third-party content as well. You're going to have the streaming option. And you've got the console to play it on here, which is, I'd say the overall value here is remarkable at $299. But let's not forget also that they're doing these monthly kind of subscription plans. Is it the all access where you'll be able to get the Series S plus everything you need for $25, I think, and X for $35? This is a completely different way of appealing to the audience than what we've traditionally seen in a console launch period, and you can't deny that it's extremely compelling. I mean, you know, when you talk about the caveats of having an all-digital machine, you can have the full fat experience for just $10 more.
Yeah, that really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? And it's very easy to see how somebody could make that jump very easily. Like, oh, it's only $10 more. It's very similar to some of the phone plans that have been out there. But I almost think that this plan is... it would always be an interesting idea and effective, but I think specifically this year, with a lot of the hardships people have faced, if they want to get into this new console generation and they're excited, they need something like fun and exciting to be, you know, to play, I guess. This is something that kind of makes that maybe a little more feasible for a lot of people.
Definitely.
And more appealing, you know what I mean? So this could really work out very well for them, I think.
So let's talk about the technical aspects that we were shown in the launch video, which was hosted by Jason Ronald.
With that amazing beard, by the way. I love that beard.
Xbox beard guy, yeah. There is a lot of stuff in there, a lot of content. First of all, something very odd here. It's as though our performance analysis tools have been transplanted to Redmond HQ. I think we should stress here that Microsoft appear to have copied our tool or made their own and made it look very much like ours. We have not given them our performance analysis tools.
It could be there's like an open source frame rate tool out there as well that I think some other channels have used. So maybe it's that, but then again, you know, maybe they developed their own internal one as well. It could be either way.
Yeah. But in terms of the demos that we saw, first of all, we actually got a proper visualization of shader feedback sampling and the way texture management is going to be handled in the next gen, basically leveraging the solid state storage to reduce the burden on system memory. And I was happy to see that demo because I don't think my position on memory has changed since we filmed the Direct 6 months ago. 8 gigs for a next-gen console is going to be a tight squeeze.
Yeah, it's tight on memory, and that's also kind of brings up, I mean, related to all of this, this is an S machine still, right? Which means this is for backwards compatibility purposes. This also means that you'll be playing the Xbox One/S versions of content, right? And I think this is something that maybe hadn't been considered by some folks, where if you're playing an Xbox One game, it's not going to be the Xbox One X version of the game. You're not going to get the 360 4K resolution backwards compatibility, things like that.
I'm not sure that's been officially confirmed, but you know, basically, if you think it through rationally, there's no other way it can be done. The Xbox One X has 9 gigabytes of system memory available to titles. The Series S has 8. I've seen some reports that it's actually 7.5, but regardless, either configuration, it's still lower than the Xbox One X. So I think, you know, it's almost like a foregone conclusion that the backwards compatibility will be drawing upon Xbox One S as opposed to Xbox One X. So that's something to factor into the equation. Also, you know, I think in terms of overall GPU power, like for like against Xbox One X, it's going to be the same, but will be actually lower in some scenarios that are sort of relying on raw compute.
That's actually an interesting point, though, is because the GPU, it may be running backwards compatible games in Xbox One mode, but because the GPU is so much capable, and knowing what we know about the way backwards compatibility works, you should actually still be able to clean up performance issues. So games that maybe struggled on Xbox One S, either the dynamic resolution was overly aggressive, you could slow down, things like that, conceivably they could actually run noticeably smoother on this machine.
I think the other technical demo that really impressed me was Gears 5 running at 120 frames per second on Xbox Series S.
Oh yeah.
That was really impressive stuff, and it shows that titles are going to be leaning a lot more heavily on the CPU this generation, and you know, there's very little compromise. I think it's like a couple of 100 megahertz on the CPU versus the X, and you know, we've got this fantastic looking demo here. and it shows what could be possible, stuff that we haven't seen in the past.
Yeah.
Even though on paper the Series S has a lower teraflop count than the One X.
And I think that's really key, is because it's easier to scale down graphics, I think, to fit a slightly lesser GPU. But if you're CPU bound, that becomes a lot more difficult, I think, to solve from a game design perspective. So that is the really important part here. And this is, I think, what allows this to work in the first place, is that by matching the CPU there, you can kind of ensure that, okay, we just need to focus on scaling the GPU related effects and resolution to fit the lower powered machine.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to checking out what they've got there. They also showed a whole bunch of games that they said were running on Series S hardware. And they looked good. They seem to be running at high frame rates where appropriate. And maybe it is just the case that the resolution drops and texture quality drops accordingly, but everything is fine. But, you know, I'm still curious about how this is all going to play out in the long term. So consider this. We had the Unreal Engine 5 demo running on PlayStation 5. That was running at 1440p already. It had like temporal upscaling to 4K. But it's already a demonstration that the GPU is being used in different ways and resolution is being mitigated in order to make new things possible. So how's all of this going to play out on the Series S?
That's a really good question, and I've wondered about that. I mean, Epic made it pretty clear, though, that demo is something, at least aspects of the Unreal Engine 5 stuff is very doable on even less powerful hardware. In this case, though, I mean, you have to wonder, is a game like that, well, that's not even a game, but as a demo like that targeting 1440p on this more powerful machine, what would that mean for the S? Would that mean just like, say, a 720 or 900p resolution with some sort of like upscaling technique to hit 1080p? Like, how would that vary? That's really kind of the question we still have, I guess.
Yeah, and also when you consider how scaling would affect ray tracing. I mean, if you're already at a lower resolution because you want to use ray tracing effects, how's that going to affect the Series S? So I think there's still a lot of questions to be answered here, and hopefully we'll get some response to queries from Microsoft soon, and we can report back on that. But I think, I don't know, overall, in summary, I love the fact that, you know, I don't know, if we go back and look at everything we've seen for this new console generation, bigger machines, power-hungry machines, and it's kind of at odds with the traditional idea of what a console is, a really small, discrete machine, sits next to your TV, and you know, that's kind of its role in the living room. And I'm happy that we've got that back with the Series S. I am concerned about its limitations, of course, potential limitations. The demos that we've seen so far look fantastic, but then again, a lot of the games are going to be leaning into the cross-gen side of things already. I'm not sure at what point we'll be beginning to see actual next generation experiences and how the less capable GPU and how the lower memory is going to affect them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I feel like Sony's shown us some vision of what we can expect with PS5 games, but Microsoft's first-party studios really haven't, they're not ready to show this stuff yet, so we really don't have a vision of what that might look like going forward. And that's going to be the real test, I think. I mean, cross-gen is all well and good, but what does this mean for actual like games that really push the envelope?
Definitely. But I think that's everything I've got to say on the topic at the moment. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's about it. It was an interesting ride, you know, seeing this thing all the way back then, and it just kind of waiting for it to drop. Like, we really weren't sure when it was actually going to be revealed. I think we were kind of like, oh, surely it'll be sometime in June or maybe even in the summer, and here we are, it's September. Yeah. And though I will say, in a weird way, it seems to have worked out for the better. Somehow, like this, the way this appeared, it's effective. I think people responded well to it. I don't think it was an intentional leak by any means, especially when you consider when it happened. It's a holiday weekend, late in the day. Nobody wants to deal with that. So I think it's very clearly a true leak. It's just they're lucky that it ended up working out for them for the better. So
yeah, I think that just the basic idea of the product and its positioning and the price, it seems to have gone down really well, and I wish them the best for the launch, because you know, especially in this economic climate, concept of really expensive consoles was not sitting right with me. And this product just looks like, you know, Microsoft couldn't have planned it, but it seems to be almost like the right product for the right time for a bunch of folks. So I'm really happy about that too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be an interesting time, and it feels like we're finally ramping up to the next generation arriving. Now that we have the price confirmations, the pre-order stuff for Xbox, it can only be a matter of time before we get the same for PlayStation 5. Like, after all this time, it's finally starting to feel real, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we're going to report back with more on this new console whenever we can. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me on this one, John.
Of course, anytime.
And in the meantime, please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Ring the bell for instant notifications whenever new Digital Foundry content drops. And if you love what we do and you want to support the team more directly, please consider the DF Patreon. It really makes a big difference. But that's all from me and John for now. Thanks for watching.